Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final SPPC meeting of this term of council. Just before I begin, I would like to remind everyone that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or call 519-661-2489, extension 2425. So, with that, we'll call the meeting to order. I'll look for any declarations of pecuniary interest. And there are none. So, a reminder that we will break for dinner at approximately 6:30, and let's move then to the consent items. I think there is a presentation connected to 2.1. 2.2? Yeah. Okay. And just looking to colleagues, do you want to deal with any of these separately by way of motion? Deputy Mayor Hubert?
But I want to speak to the community survey.
Okay, so let's deal with 2.1 at this point. This is the community survey. Deputy Mayor Hubert, anyone else?
Yeah, we're at committee, so I'll stay seated. You know, it's interesting. We have this survey, and while it reflects the opinions of about 500 people in the City of London, it really paints a picture of where we're at. And I think it would be, we would be remiss if we didn't highlight a few of the critical elements out of it. And what it says, both in terms of the work that we've done over the past 4 years, but also in terms of what it says in terms of the work that we need to do on a go-forward basis. I guess I got to stop using the we, Mayor, which you all got to do in the next 4 years. But, you know, transit remains an important part of it, not just public transit, but transportation in general and transportation infrastructure. And not that I want to open tomorrow night's debate, but certainly large developments along Southdale Road might cause us to ask questions on what do we need to do in terms of transit infrastructure. But also just in general, I'm always amazed at how satisfied people are, that London's a great place to live, and that you know, while we may not hit the national norm, and I'm not sure how you get 97% anyhow, that's an outrageously large number, that Londoners are generally satisfied with both the services that city provides, the value that they get for the taxpayer dollar that they spend, and I think those are important elements, and that that actually transcends across a number of categories, both in terms of education and in terms of economic status. So without going into each individual item, Mr. Mayor, I think it's important to say that most people think that the quality of life in the City of London is pretty good. And yet they also identify that there's work to be done, and an increasing recognition of issues around homelessness and affordable housing and transit. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be taken away from this survey, and I just wanted to highlight some of those points.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll go to Councillor Squire and then Usher. Anyone else?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. I find the survey interesting because it corresponded to a great deal to the survey that I was doing from July through to October 22nd, and the reaction of people. And I think a couple of things really struck me, and that is that people in the City of London, I think, or they certainly are indicating, that they want us to deal with the basics. They want us to deal with the things that they see and feel every day, whether that's transportation or infrastructure. And I think I've heard a great deal about that. The other thing that I found interesting was that there is a trend from 2017 that's sort of been ongoing for a while, that the number of people who are now prepared to say, let's cut services to keep our tax level reasonable is increasing. They're not equal now, but they're getting closer, so that in 2018, the percentage of people who want to increase taxes to maintain delivery levels is 43, and now it's 35 who are prepared to cut services to maintain taxes. And I think that's something that the next council should really be aware of, that there isn't a limitless appetite in the community to spend taxpayer money without there being a real return on that investment. And that certainly is going to guide me going forward.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to build on what my two colleagues just said, I find the survey very positive. I would have liked to see it a little bit better in some respects. I do feel that the quality of life is very important. And this is one of the biggest things that I've heard over the years that I have been here, always the quality of life. But it's the quality of life based on the service that we provide also. And I think that in general, people are very satisfied with this. There are two things that I just want to point out here in addition to what my colleagues have said. And one is the timing of this survey. The timing was done sort of just before the middle of the year. In other words, May to June. And I think that that's, especially in an election year, it has some effect. We're right in the middle of all the turmoil. I will use the word turmoil with respect to BRT and transit, and people are just beginning to learn about what it's all about. But I think it's a little early in the year for people to be able to judge what the service is like. I think that if it was later, not in an election year, but in general, I think that you might find that this would be a little bit different. The other thing I just want to point out is that I would suggest that one of the things that we don't sell as good as we can is the fact that people say this, most of what they say, they make these decisions, Mr. Chair, based on the property taxes, the bills that they see. And when that's all they see, and we must remember that the only tax bill that the general public or the constituents or the residents see is the property tax. They get a large amount of money taken out for provincial taxes and federal taxes, but they seem to tend to forget that. And we have to build our service where the rubber hits the road based on that 8 to 9% of the total taxes. They pay approximately 92 to 93% of taxes in federal and provincial. So I think that that's something that we really want to bring out. That, in addition to the fact that based on what we do, we still maintain a AAA service. So I just wanted to point that out. I think we did a really good job with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. Anyone else? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. My colleagues have made a number of the comments that I would have made. I have a question for staff. It's on page 49 of the report. It's in the Appendix B. I was looking at the demographics to see how well they match up, and for the most part, pretty good. A lot more university graduates in this survey than you find in London. But when I look down at household income, I noticed that the percentages only add up to 78%. So there must have been, I think, a typo in there somewhere. I was wondering if we know what that might have been.
Ms. Wilcox.
Let me ask another question to give some time to respond to that. On page 41 and the Appendix A, it said the preferred methods of receiving information from the city. It's kind of grown up to 10% that people are looking for us to reach them in a way we call other. And I'm wondering what some of those other ways are now. What are people looking for? So those were my two questions.
Through the chair, with regards to your first question regarding the percentage and the demographics, I'm not sure on that answer, but I can get back to you on that. With regards to your second question, this is a high-level survey of perceptions, so often the categories aren't defined, so it does define a high level of terms. We would have to go back and do a bit of a deep dive and determine what exactly they're defining as other. It's not readily available in this survey.
Okay, and I suppose it could literally have been other And, all right. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Okay, let's deal with this as a motion. This has been moved to receive by Councillor Usher, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. There are no additional speakers, so I'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, let's move right along to 2.2. Mr. Hayward?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm really pleased to bring this report to you this afternoon. The importance of the strategic plan cannot really be underemphasized. I think it really is a place where you've set expectations on what we're going to deliver, and you've assigned resources to deliver those expectations. We need to be accountable for the resources that you've assigned to show how we've moved forward. And it's important that we don't only look at efficiency, but we look at how effective we are in the delivery of those services. So are they impacting our community? So the reports, we've got 4 reports available to you today that really go into the measurement of how well we've achieved the various strategies and look at also the impact on the community. And rather than me speaking forever, I'm going to let Ms. Livingston here introduce you, and she's got a short presentation to go through. One thing I do want to say, though, is thank you to all the folks that have helped contributed to this throughout the city and throughout the boards and commissions as well, and what we're calling the backbone team and various other members of the organization as well. So thanks.
Well, 4 years later, over to you, Ms. Livingston, for a summary of the past 4 years. And I'm sure you're also hard at work on the next 4 at the same time. So the sooner we get through this report, probably the better for you and the backbone team.
Yes, thank you. So no questions would be awesome. Thank you, Mr. Hayward, and Council will recall that in establishing the strategic plan, you also established a commitment that we report out regularly on progress. We've been doing that the last couple of years, twice a year in terms of the progress report in May and November. And then in November of each year, there's also a report to the community which highlights accomplishments, which looks like this at your seat. In addition, though, because the progress report just says, how are you doing in terms of implementing, there was a bigger question about what difference has it made? What difference has implementing those strategies made? So to that end, Council in June approved the Strategic Plan Measurement Framework and Tool, which I'll speak more about in a moment. In terms of the progress that's been made, I'm pleased to report that as of November, 97.4% of all milestones are either complete or on target. And also since May, there's been a slight reduction in the number of milestones that are at caution or below plan. And as has been the practice over the last number of reporting cycles, we will be taking variance reports on those handful of milestones to the respective standing committee with further detail on where they're at. In terms of the strategic plan impact assessment, that framework and tool really allowed us to do 2 levels of analysis. The first is what's called the performance report, which was in your package, and it really answered the question, did we do what we set out to do? There's metrics assigned to each strategy as well as targets, and it allowed us to understand year over year whether those targets have been met. The second level of analysis allows us to understand what difference did that make? What change has occurred for Londoners at an aggregate level of implementing those strategies? It's important to understand that we are working with complete data for 2015, 16, and 17. So that's an important aspect of the analysis that's been undertaken so far. In terms of the impact assessment, that document essentially looks at the strategies from 2 aspects. One is, where is there evidence of impact, where a difference was made for Londoners because those steps were implemented? And where we're able to demonstrate impact is where there's been both quantitative and qualitative demonstration of change. There are also some strategies where we do not have that level of information, so we call them little to no impact. It means there were no quantitative measures, and there may or may not have been some qualitative measures. And so what I'd just like to emphasize here is it doesn't mean that there wasn't an impact for those strategies. It means we weren't able to tell you what it was. So those strategies were implemented. There may have been a positive change for London, but we didn't have the data to be able to say that there was an evidence of impact of change. With respect to the impact that has occurred, I'd just like to take a minute to highlight some examples of where we have strategies that were able to demonstrate an impact because they were implemented over the life of the strategic plan. So I'll just take a few minutes to highlight some of what that looks like. With respect to strengthening our community, we achieved an impact in vibrant, connected, and engaged neighborhoods. We achieved an impact in access to caring and compassionate services. We achieved an impact in access to amazing arts, culture, and recreation experiences. With respect to building a sustainable city, some of the examples of where we've been able to achieve an impact are in maintaining our robust infrastructure, are in supporting a stronger and healthier environment, and are in protecting heritage for future generations for Londoners. In terms of growing our economy, we were able to demonstrate an impact in terms of supporting a more diverse and resilient economy. We were able to demonstrate an impact in increasing development and enhancements in London's urban and core areas. And we were able to demonstrate an impact in our investment in workforce development. With respect to leading in public service, some of the areas that we've been able to demonstrate an impact are in open, accountable, and more responsive government, in our organizational practices being more innovative and supportive, and our continued efforts on financial management being more proactive. These are just a few of the examples of where we were able to demonstrate a positive impact for Londoners over the time period of 2015, 16, and 17. So we'd like to be able to say what the impact was for 2018, but we are only 10 months into the year. However, I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some of the accomplishments that have been achieved this year. And those include the city partnered with the Y and London Public Library to open the new Bostwick Community Centre, YMCA, and library. The Middlesex London Health Unit and community partners released the Middlesex London Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy called A Foundation for Action. The city, again, received the highest possible credit rating, 42 years in a row. Earlier this year, Service London Business opened their hub on the first floor of City Hall. The Blackfriars Bridge reinstated frame and is continuing with the reassembly. The Neighborhood Small Events Fund was launched, and this is a program that provides one-time grants for up to $500 per year for community or neighborhood groups holding small events on public property. We achieved our service review target of $1.5 million. The Dundas Place contract was approved and construction is underway for Dundas Street between Talbot and Richmond. And for something to look forward to in 2019, in collaboration with community key stakeholders, Tourism London led a successful bid for the 2019 Juno Awards. Those are just a handful of the kinds of accomplishments that occurred over the last year through the implementation of the strategic plan. So some of our learnings as we come to the end of the reporting cycle for this strategic plan, we had many successes, but there are some learnings for us in terms of the next strategic plan. And one of those important learnings is having very clear statements of outcome, expected results, and measures clearly established at the beginning so that we can accurately measure progress year over year and cumulatively over the lifespan of the plan. The other important part is we now have some very rich information, particularly in the impact assessment, that can be used to help inform the development of the next plan so that we're basing it in some evidence in terms of where we've seen a difference that's been made for Londoners over our recent efforts. So at the close, I would just like to add to Mr. Hayward's thanks. The amount of work to monitor the progress and develop the performance reports and impact assessment has been quite significant for the Strategic Thinkers Table and our ABC partners, and I would just like to echo his thanks to their efforts. And I'd be pleased to try and answer any questions.
A very, very impressive amount of work. I think that it's hard to emphasize that. And I'm going to open the floor to any committee members who may have questions or comments over the past 4 years of the plan. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Livingston for the presentation, and I just also want to thank staff for the amount of work that they put into this. And, you know, I think Ms. Livingston did a really good job in briefing us very small, very compactly. But there's so much more that we accomplished over the past 4 years that are not in here. And I just hope that at some point in time we get the opportunity of telling our constituents. I know that some of it we were able to tell people while we were canvassing for election. And I know that a lot of people could see this, but a lot of people don't really live in all the areas, such as the Hyde Park and the Wonderland Road that we expanded, and all of those nice places, Sunningdale area. A lot of it is to do with the infrastructure, the engineering, and so on that were put into this. We spend an enormous amount of money in those type of projects. Even our transit system has been expanded, and people don't really see that because they either take the bus or they don't take the bus. But I just wanted to highlight that what we saw here is really just scratching the surface. And we would need 2 days or more to be able to identify all the things that we did over the past 4 years. But to put it into perspective, we spent approximately $1 billion per year over the past 4 years to do everything that the city needed. And like I said, it's where the rubber hits the road. But we accomplished a great deal for what we talked about earlier, for the quality of life. And part of that is because we have compassion. I have to bring that word in. We have compassion for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Livingston, and to the entire Civic Administration. I think this really has shown what the collaboration between the Civic Administration and the councillors can really help to accomplish. I find this is really important, the way it's been presented with the survey results. And if we take a look at what the survey, the most important issues in London and the top mentions, as compared to what the strategic priorities were for the administration and council over the course of this term, they're very well aligned. And it really shows that there was an impact and it was noticed by the community. When you take a look at the issue of net city government, confidence in city government as a concern, in 2013 that was at 22%, in 2018 it was at 4%. In terms of taxes, the norm is 11%, and at 2015 it was at 6%. At the end of this term, it's been 3%. We look at transportation, however, which has been a key focus. That has really been the place where there's been the most attention and increase in concerns and desires for our transportation to be addressed within the city, going from 10% up to 36%. So what you see in the strategic plan and how it aligned with how the city responded to it, I think it really shows that we were really touching on those things that were really important to people. The economy. The economy was 38% in 2013, 4% in 2018. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in our history right now. We've had a stable taxation. We've created an environment together due to a lot of factors. One, the economy in general. across the country and across North America, but also locally too. And we've managed to do a lot of that by setting out the objectives at the forefront and really sticking to those, and to have over 97% of those objectives. And I think when we all looked at the strategic plan in the beginning and saw how many objectives there were in there, we thought that's a massive amount, and we might be setting ourselves up for failure. But we didn't. 97% is phenomenal. And 0.4. And the remainders are well on track and can be satisfied relatively easily. So I think this showed that the exercise was very worthwhile. It's worthwhile to embark upon again. I think there's been some learnings from this as well, and those have been illustrated quite well. And we've had discussions about how, if for the next term, we would take a look at the strategic plan and how we build that. And I think that will really help to inform our course over the next few years, and our priorities too. And I think I want to thank administration for kind of help keeping us to this too. I know we have a tendency every once in a while to see something over in the corner like a squirrel and chase that, but staying on track has been really key to the success collectively, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Hubert and Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. I want to make a couple comments. Just on the impact building a sustainable city on the slide, if I'm reading that right, like if my math's right, are we really saying 3,245,000,000 construction permits, George? Like, are we, I got to repeat that number. Like, that is that a, like?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. So that's, if you recall, even a couple of years ago, we were at, I think, 1.4 billion, and we're trending up around $1 billion again this year. So over those 3 years, yes.
So George, it's 3,245,000,000. This is kind of a reverse shout out. That's amazing.
Not that many permits. It's a dollar value in construction value, construction dollar value.
Thank you. So it's a dollar value. So it's $3 billion worth of construction over a 3-year period. That, I mean, whether it's the actual number of permits or the construction value, that is absolutely huge, because every one of those dollars economically has a multiplier effect. And yet, I know you only get there because planning does a good job and development services does a good job at processing so that there's actually something to give a permit to, which is a great thing. The other thing I wanted to say is, you know, the back page of this, or the second last page, boy, some of us looked really good 4 years ago. I have to say, those are great pictures. So, and I want a little shout out on that. So some of us have grown more gray in the ensuing 4 years, I have to say. But when I went through the report over the weekend and started to look at, and started to break it down into the areas that we've really seen significant progress, it's a little overwhelming from a dashboard perspective, in that there are so many areas, and almost to our fault, frankly. Almost to our fault, because I heard at times, well, I'm not sure what this council is really doing, and us and council and administration together, because we were doing so much, and it almost overwhelmed the public, in that there was so much good work being done that it was hard to highlight those sort of big impacts, significant changes. So from a body of work over the last 4 years, I think this is really bears out that there's been huge steps forward. And I think the part that doesn't come through, and I say this with the greatest respect and being sort of a social scientist, quantitative tells only half the story. And it is a story. The real story is the qualitative impact that we have on people's lives in the community. And so behind every metric, behind every number, there is a personal impact that has happened for someone. And they'll never be able to draw the line from that number to that initiative that has changed some aspect of their life. And I think that's the part that we need to be most proud of. I was looking through, you know, some of the leading in public service. And I think the shift that has happened in the last several years in terms of the culture at City Hall, the feel around City Hall, the pride that our employees have in the work that they do, the relationship with members of our various unions needs to be celebrated as well. Doesn't come out in the numbers, but it's so much a part of what it is to be leading in public service and getting it done and making an impact for people on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for indulging me on this, but I think there's much to be proud of here. And I think as go forward position, somehow we have to figure out how to make sure the public really sees that work and is aware of those little steps forward that make such a big difference on a day-to-day basis for folks in the community.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just want to say thank you to staff. I know there's a lot of work that goes into the strategic plan, the updates, and continuing throughout the past 4 years. When I came on this council, I was pleased that we had a strategic plan that gave us a focus, and that, I think, served us well as a council. And also the 4-year budget. I know that's coming down the road, but that is sort of aligned with the strategic plan. And I just want to give my thanks to staff, because you're the ones that do the work and sort of guide us and confirm what we hear from the community as well. It goes hand in hand. So I just wanted to make those comments. I think the 4-year budget is also an important part. I know we're not talking about that here, but looking forward to that in the near future.
Any other speakers? Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. We've done a lot of planning in this term, so we've created a lot of plans, and I think that's going to make the work of the next council much easier. We've tackled the problems, we've investigated, looked to see how we should face them, and now it's really a matter of just putting money towards those plans. We need to prioritize and figure out how to move forward, but the plans are in place and we know the direction to go, and that's often half the battle. So I think the work that's been done here is not only good for its own sake, but also for the future.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and it's obviously a lot to take in one report. I don't know if anyone has the paper copy of the report, but I think it gives you a sense of how much information we're dealing with. My copy of it is 546 pages. And I wonder, through the chair, you know, I think the reporting on the timelines, you know, we've had these reports regularly. When we're looking ahead to the next strategic plan, do we think we're going to have reporting on a similar kind of basis in terms of whether things are on target, in terms of the timeline? Are we going to continue that sort of dashboard reporting? Are we going to do it all at once like this in a big chunk? Because I do find it to be a lot of information. And on the issue of the impact assessment, I think I have a couple of specific questions and comments. I wonder if maybe we could do with the timeline reporting first to see how it's going to roll into the next strategic plan.
Through the chair, at this point in time, we would propose that the progress report continue to be reported on a twice-a-year basis. The report to the community, which is sort of like an annual report, would also be done once a year. The difference between what you see here, the amount of information you see here, is that would happen once only. So the performance report, which is also new, would be an annual report coming in, likely not November. I can't remember the exact timing, but it would be, have to reflect the full year of data, so into the spring. The impact assessment would be only done once in the 4-year period at the end. So it is true that you're seeing a lot of information at the same time, but that's because 2 of the reports are new to you. You've not seen the performance reports, and that performance report also has 2 years of data. You would only be seeing 1 year at a time. The impact assessment would come once in the 4-year cycle. So so there would be one very heavy day like this at the end of the strat plan period at this point in time.
Okay, I really appreciate the performance report in particular. I think it's really helpful. The impact part, I think it's helpful to get a sense of the narrative, right? Like, what is the story that all these tables are kind of telling us when you're looking at the numbers? I do think that is helpful, especially the section where it says, look, we didn't really see a lot of quantitative indicators of impact here. There may be some that are more qualitative in nature. I think it's just helpful to understand what's going on in those areas and how it guides some of the questions and discussion we might have. I had 2 questions about specific areas where we saw some pretty good performance. One is around tree planting. And so tree planting is way up. And I know that was part of our strategy, was to increase the amount of tree planting that's going on. But I wonder, just through the chair to our staff, you know, from a resource perspective, are we comfortable with, you know, our ability to deliver that kind of sustained level of tree planting? I have just more recently received some feedback from people that tree planting is happening almost too fast. There's so many trees coming. So nice problem to have, but it is an issue. And I wonder if our staff would just speak to that, sort of where they see tree planting going.
Thank you, through the chair. We are confident we can continue to deliver at the levels that we have been recently, although we have been having a number of conversations about the long-term maintenance of trees as an urban asset and ensuring we have the right resources to maximize their health, particularly for new plantings. We do get the same calls occasionally that this tree magically showed up and that maybe it is a bit too quick, but we believe we're on track to continue as we are. The real challenge for us as we continue to work towards the 1 million trees will be space. We're running out of easy accessible places on the public lands to plant new trees, but as we can continue to work with the private sector and private homeowners, we may be able to continue that.
Thank you. And just for those who haven't read the report, you know, we're planting twice as many trees as we were, which is pretty great. I wanted to just talk about the reduction in serious and fatal collisions, because that's also very significant. So we went down from like 1,364 in the 2015 base year to 883, which is like a 35% decrease, way more than we were anticipating in the road safety strategy. And I wonder if our staff just want to speak to where they think that is headed, because that's certainly a top of mind concern for people in the community. It comes up a lot. I think we have made some progress bringing the red light cameras, these different pieces. Whether we expect that trend to kind of continue, or if we think it's going to maybe moderate, you know, in 2018 and so on.
Through the chair, predicting serious and fatal collisions can be a really tricky approach in terms of traffic safety management, because the near misses that happen when there's an unsafe condition could have just as easily resulted in a crash, but for some small change, either in terms of weather, the driver, the road conditions. We're happy to see that reduction. We certainly want to continue with things like the Vision Zero work that we're doing that's encouraging people to drive more safely on our streets. We also are excited about some potential changes in legislation that will allow us to look at a lower base speed limit for residential roads. We'll be bringing something to the new council with respect to that shortly, as well as the opportunity for automated enforcement of speed in particularly high-risk areas where pedestrians may be involved. I wouldn't want to speculate on what sort of reduction we may see in the future, but certainly our commitment as staff is to continue to stay abreast of what the current technology is for managing traffic safety as best we can, and to engage the really important people in this conversation, which are the people who use our transportation infrastructure, in making great decisions when they're behind the wheel, when they're walking, when they're cycling.
Thank you. I don't want to turn the discussion into a Civic Works Committee meeting, but you know, I do think that's a good reduction, 481 fewer. Obviously, it's a huge problem still to be dealt with. 883 serious and fatal collisions. That's a lot in 1 year. So obviously, we have a lot more work to do in terms of making the roads safer for everyone. I do think that the metrics part, you know, how are we going to measure these things? How well are we doing? This is really helpful to have as we're going into the next a strategic plan, right? Figuring out, are these the right measures? Just seeing them all together like that, I think it helps us think through, are these the right things? Or should we be measuring something else? You know, what are we missing measures for, missing targets for? And certainly I'm going to spend some time thinking about it between now and when we start working on the next one.
Any other speakers for first round? Councillor Cassidy? Anyone else?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to add my thanks to staff for the work on the strategic plan, not just this report, but most of all for the work. It's interesting, Councillor Turner spoke about distractions and straying off the path that we set for ourselves. And I don't know if people recall this, but I remember 4 years ago being told if it's not in the strategic plan, it won't happen, or it won't get our attention. We won't work on that. So I think council was very careful to make sure we put the things in the plan that we wanted to see get attention throughout the year. But it didn't exactly happen that way, and I know we did chase a few squirrels over the last 4 years, and so I really want to commend staff for achieving the targets that they did achieve. You know, it's pretty incredible knowing that we did have certain distractions throughout the year. And I think it's very important that we continue this work over the next 4 years, that we have a very focused and targeted plan to guide us, and that we have staff working as hard as they can to keep the council on track. I'm seeing south of the border and definitely north of the border as well, this growing trend towards populist form of politics and government, and that kind of atmosphere can only lead us to chasing more and more squirrels, and I'm really hopeful that we will avoid those kinds of distractions and create a strategic plan as good or probably better than this one, and looking forward to staff keeping us on target. Thanks.
Other speakers? First round. I think Mr. Hayward would say that the Apollo 13 was on course, on target. Was it 1% of the time? 3% of the time. So you've done a much better job over the past 4 years than NASA. Councillor Usher, second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to make this brief, and I'd be remiss if I don't talk a little bit about diversity and inclusivity. I think we've improved a great deal with what we've set out to do based on this plan. But I want to say that, and I don't mean this as a critique, but as a caution, that we still have a long way to go. And that the next 4 years, I think that based on what I have seen here, I think we're going to improve on that. And the reason I say this is because the perception of the public out there is that we have not improved within the workforce and the workplace based on our promises or based on the work that we tried to do. But I can assure you that the numbers prove that we have. I'm not saying that we are there yet, and I'm going to quote what I heard at some of the meetings over the past few months. When I came on council, we had about 4% of the workforce was visible minorities. And we had about 8.9% of the population being visible minority. Today we have 20% of the population being visible minorities. And based on the census that we did earlier this year, if I remember rightly, and 60% response, we had 14% average visible minorities. That tells me that we are improving. All I'm trying to say is that the 14% is not at 20% yet. But that's okay, that's by books, and that's by numbers, and that's what we see. What I'm trying to get at, though, is that the public, if the public were to stand outside of City Hall and just have a bird's eye view of the visible minority in the workforce, in the workplace, coming in and out, they would not see that much. So I'm just saying that we have to make sure that the mix is right across the board and not focus on any specific area. It's a caution that I'm saying to staff, to council, and to myself, because I encourage people to do this. I was at a function on Saturday night, and we talked about the city. If the city doesn't do well with inclusion and diversity, the rest of the public won't do well. If the city does well, and when I say well, I mean try to reach that demographic within the community, other organizations, other companies, other institutions will follow suit. So that's where I'm coming from on behalf of the community who know that I'm engaged in this, who know that I advocate for this, and who persuade me to talk about it, and they come to talk to me about it. But we were talking about this on Saturday night at another function that I was at, and this is the type of thing that people were telling me. So I just wanted to point it out without being critical. I wanted to praise us for doing this, but I wanted to say, be caution and recognize the fact that even though we might be doing well, the perception out there is exactly the opposite. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other speakers? I'll make a few comments from the chair, if that's all right, colleagues. This is a significant amount of work, and I think the real takeaway here is that local government matters. And when civic administration and council are working in a cohesive way, they can make a huge difference. 4 years ago, there were 11 new councillors elected and a new mayor, something that's never happened, to my knowledge, in London before. We'd been out and we'd heard the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations from Londoners for months and months and months. City staff had significant plans that they were in the process of implementing, and we were able to, within 100 days, bring that together. I think there's about 1,024 different things being measured within this massive work plan. And 97.4% on track. We have to say thank you to the leadership team, to the backbone team that pulled this together, to every single employee at the city for making this happen. I'm reminded when we celebrate those 25 years of uninterrupted service events here at council, that our staff could choose to work anywhere. Our leadership team could work in any sector, and they'd be sought after. But they chose to stay here in London and to work here in London and to make our community better. I'm so pleased that Councillor Hopkins also highlighted the multi-year budget, because we wouldn't be here today with such a strategic plan at a level of specificity that you don't see in other municipalities across Ontario or Canada. We wouldn't be here today with a 97.4% on track, on target record if it wasn't for that multi-year budget. And that can't be lost on us. So we'll spend a little bit more time talking about this probably tomorrow night at the last council meeting for our term. I'm sure that members will have things that they want to highlight, but I'll leave it at this. You should be proud of the work that you've done over the past 4 years. You've created a great starting point for next term of council, a great point for them to continue to move the community forward. So thank you, and thank you again to everyone involved. If there are no other speakers, I'll look for a motion to receive. Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Helmer. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, colleagues, let's move our attention to 2.3, motion to receive the communication from Councillor Ridley. Councillor Van Holst, thank you, Councillor Park. Any speakers? Okay, we'll wait for that to come up on screen. Councillor Squires voting manually, yay?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, let's move items for direction. This is 4.1. It's a very straightforward appointments to the striking committee. And you'll see that we require 5 citizens at large. And with the added name, we have 5 citizens at large whose names have come forward. So I'm not sure if there's any discussion. Look for a motion. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any speakers? Okay. Please, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. The appointments are quite diverse. I was reading through the list, and it's great to have a diverse group coming forward on the striking committee, and also great that we've got 5 for members at large as well now.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote, that motion carries 12-0.
And of course, our thanks to every individual that's put their name forward for this. It's a significant amount of work, and I'm sure it will be again in this coming season. 4.2, inaugural council meeting. Looking to take this show on the road. So look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Park. Any speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, we received communication from the London Chamber of Commerce, recommendations for an allocations formula for municipal surpluses. I'm not sure if there are any speakers. We definitely need a motion to deal with this in some way, potentially to receive. Councillor Helmer?
I move to receive it.
Seconded by?
Yeah, but should it, if I may?
We'll just deal with the motion and then seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Go ahead.
So my question, and to my colleague as well, do we want to just receive it? Do you want to refer it to a discussion of corporate services in the new term of council, or is it just receipt? So
Well, we deal with the surplus deficit policy regularly, like all financial policies. We're going to review it. I know that our staff have seen the communication. I suspect the next time we talk about it, those ideas are going to be, part of the discussion. Some of the things we've actually talked about before. I don't think we need to specifically refer it to a specific discussion. I think it's going to be done as a matter of course next term.
Anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Squire.
Yeah, just a question. And I don't know if this is true or not. Was there a conversation or discussion or meetings that came before the letter, or did this letter just appear? Because it just seems different to me that someone would write a letter saying, here's what we want, when it's a lot easier to just sort of knock on your door and say, I'd like to talk to you about this. Because I have to be honest and say, no one from the London Chamber of Commerce has ever asked to meet with me, talk to me, or anything like that. So I'm very curious about that, because I'm going to contact them and say, why didn't you just pick up the phone and call, if that's the case?
Through the chair, I received the letter at the same time through the agenda package as council did, so we did not have any discussions with them. Although I did reach out to the chamber today, and I haven't been able to have a discussion yet, but certainly that's something that we'll be looking to have, to see if they were aware of some of the policy discussions that have happened over the last couple of months.
Yeah, just because I'm known for giving people a hard time on certain committees when they don't reach out to staff or they don't talk to us, I think the same applies to the Chamber of Commerce. I think it would be tremendously helpful if they reached out and said to a councillor or to you, here's what we're thinking, here's what's going on, because all of a sudden you see things maybe in the media that aren't accurate, things being said about what we are doing with our surplus, and I hope the Chamber feels comfortable in doing that, because I think that would be a lot more productive than just sending a letter to us like this. So that's just my point of view on that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
Colleagues, under deferred matters, additional business, we do have one piece of additional business. It's an in-camera item. I understand there is a mover for that. Councillor Helmer, do you have that motion, or would you like for it to come up on screen?
I believe the clerks have the language and the reason for going into closed session.
Okay, so I'll ask Ms. Westlake Power to read that once it's up on screen, please.
So, the reason would be a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual with respect to employment-related matters and advice and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose.
Okay, we would need a seconder for that. Councillor Hopkins. And speakers, Councillor Zafman.
I have no problem with this. I have another piece of item that I haven't mentioned for additional business that I'd like to raise. I just wanted to know if we wanted to do that prior to going in camera or afterwards.
Okay, let's do that now. We'll do what we need to do in the system to allow that to happen. We'll likely adjourn from the committee room, so let's deal with anything that's public at this time. So as long as the mover and the seconder are okay holding off on that motion at this time, I'll go to Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time I can raise this or tomorrow potentially at council, but as of the middle of last week, new Ontario regulations have been introduced regarding cannabis. And this specifically has a major impact on a policy that we introduced back in December of last year regarding citing of cannabis stores. One of the major things that we looked at in there was a 500-meter buffer between schools and a number of other community facilities. I'm just curious, is this appropriate for today, or I can raise it tomorrow as an inquiry?
Yeah, I think inquiry tomorrow evening, certainly an emergent motion as well if there is one that would apply. This is a Planning Environment Committee item, not an SPPC item, so if you don't mind holding off till tomorrow night. You've let everybody know where you're going though, so we'll just let that happen for 24 hours. Anything else on additional business? Okay. So we'll bring that other motion forward, moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. There are no speakers, so I will call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, we will head then to Committee Room 3 for our closed session, and we will adjourn from that room as well. See everybody tomorrow night.